I never thought I'd be the guy writing something like this. I've read plenty of creepy stories online, the kind where someone swears up and down that they experienced something paranormal, only for half the comments to call them out on their bullshit. And honestly, I used to be one of those people. I believed in what I could see, touch, or hear with my own ears. But after what's been happening to me for the past few weeks, I don't know what to believe anymore. I worked the night shift as a security guard in an underground parking garage. It's nothing glamorous. Just a dimly lit, concrete cavern stretching 4 levels beneath the street, smelling of motor oil, damp air, and something else I can't quite place, something stale, like old dust trapped in a place that never sees the sun. It's cold, too, colder than it should be, especially in the deeper levels where the air feels heavier, like it's pressing down on you. I took this job because, honestly, it seemed easy. Sit in a tiny booth, watch a couple of monitors, make sure no one's breaking into cars. A few patrols here and there to keep myself from dozing off, but otherwise? An easy paycheck. At least, that's what I thought. My shifts run from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. At that hour, the garage is practically empty. The last few stragglers clear out by midnight, leaving behind only a handful of vehicles, mostly those left overnight by people staying in the nearby hotels or catching red-eye flights. After that, it's just me, the occasional hum of an engine as someone pulls in or out, and the constant flicker of the old fluorescent lights that never seem to fully commit to staying on. The first time I heard it, I remember checking my phone, just scrolling mindlessly to pass the time, when I noticed something. A sound. Footsteps. At first, I didn't think much of it. It's a parking garage, people come and go. But these weren't the hurried steps of someone rushing to their car. These were slow. Steady. Purposeful. I checked the monitors, expecting to see someone wandering around. But all I saw were empty concrete floors, long rows of parked cars stretching into the dim light. I leaned out of my booth, looking around. The sound was coming from below me, probably the 3rd level. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out, my breath turning to mist in the cold air. The second my foot hit the ground outside, the footsteps stopped. Just, gone. I stood there for a moment, listening. The silence in that garage wasn't normal silence. It was the kind that makes your ears ring, like the space around you is swallowing all the sound. The kind of silence that makes you feel alone. After a while, I convinced myself I had imagined it. Maybe the sound had been coming from the street above, distorted by the echo of the concrete. I went back inside, shaking it off. But then it happened again. A few nights later, just past 1 a.m., I was sitting in the booth when I heard them again. This time, they were closer. I turned to the monitors, my stomach tightening. Still nothing. But I could hear them, footsteps, echoing up from below. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out. The air was colder than before, heavy with something I couldn't put my finger on. I started down the ramp toward the 3rd level, my boots scuffing against the concrete. The moment I stepped onto the lower level, the footsteps stopped. I shined my flashlight over the parked cars. Shadows stretched long and thin between them, moving with the flickering lights. My heart was beating too fast, but I kept walking, checking between cars. Nothing. No signs of movement. Then, just as I turned to head back. Bang! A single, sharp sound from behind me. I spun around, my flashlight beam bouncing off metal. One of the car doors had slammed shut. I felt it then, the unmistakable feeling of being watched. The kind that prickles at your skin, like something is standing just behind you, just beyond your line of sight. I swallowed hard and took a step back, my flashlight shaking slightly in my hand. Hello. My voice came out weaker than I expected. It echoed, but there was no response. I forced myself to check, moving toward the car where the sound had come from. It was an older sedan, dusty, with streaks of grime along the windows. I peered inside. Empty. I checked the doors, locked. I even tried tugging at them just to be sure. They didn't budge. There was no way it had just slammed on its own. My stomach was in knots as I backed away. I didn't run, but I walked faster than I ever have in my life. The second I stepped back onto the ramp leading to the upper level, the cold feeling lifted. Like I had passed through some kind of invisible barrier. I didn't sleep that morning. I just sat in my apartment, staring at the wall, trying to make sense of what happened. But the worst part? That was just the beginning. After that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. It wasn't just the sound of the footsteps or the car door slamming, it was the way the air felt down there. Thick. Heavy. Like I was walking into something I wasn't supposed to. But I still had a job to do, and I sure as hell wasn't about to tell my boss I was scared of a parking garage. So I convinced myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. Maybe the cold was making the metal contract, or maybe some drunk had stumbled in and somehow slipped away before I could see them. Yeah. That had to be it. The next few nights were quiet. Too quiet. No footsteps, no doors slamming, just the usual flickering lights and the distant hum of the city above. But that feeling lingered. Every time I walked past the entrance to the ramp leading down to the third level, I felt it. Like something was waiting. Watching. Then, about a week later, it happened again. It was just after 2 a.m. I was doing my usual patrol, walking the perimeter of the second level, when I heard it. The footsteps. Not below me this time. Behind me. I froze. My heart hammered against my ribs. The steps were slow, unhurried, but they were definitely there. I turned fast, my flashlight cutting through the dim light. Nothing. Just rows of parked cars stretching into the darkness. The sound had stopped the second I turned. I swallowed hard, my throat dry as sandpaper. My breath came out in short, shaky puffs in the cold air. Then, tap, tap, tap. A slow, deliberate pattern. But this time, it wasn't footsteps. It sounded like fingers. Fingertips, tapping against metal. I swung my flashlight toward the sound. It was coming from a black SUV parked near the center of the lot. The tap, tap, tap continued, soft and rhythmic, like someone was drumming their fingers on the hood. I stepped closer, every muscle in my body screaming at me to turn the hell around. The second my light landed on the SUV, the tapping stopped. I swallowed the lump in my throat and forced myself forward. I walked around the SUV, shining my flashlight through the tinted windows. Nothing inside. I reached out hesitantly and placed my palm against the hood. Ice cold. That didn't make sense. The garage was cold, sure, but cars usually held some warmth if they'd been parked recently. But this? This felt like it had been sitting here for days. Then, from somewhere behind me. A whisper. I didn't hear words. Just the faintest breath of sound, like someone was standing inches from my ear. I spun around so fast I nearly lost my footing. My flashlight beam swept across empty pavement. I was done. I didn't care if I looked like a coward. I walked straight back to the booth, locked the door, and sat there, gripping my coffee cup like it was the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. The rest of the night passed without another sound. But I didn't relax. Not for a second. Because now I knew, without a doubt, that I wasn't alone down there, that I barely slept after that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard it, the slow, deliberate tapping on the SUV, the whisper at my ear. It was like my brain had recorded the sounds and decided to play them back on a loop. But the worst part? The thought that kept gnawing at me, keeping me from brushing it off as my imagination. Whatever it was getting closer. The elevator incident. The next night, I came in for my shift feeling like shit. I hadn't gotten more than a couple of hours of sleep, and my nerves were shot. The idea of spending another 8 hours alone in that garage made my skin crawl, but I had bills to pay. The first few hours were quiet. Midnight rolled around, and everything was still. Just the occasional flicker of the overhead lights, the hum of the security monitors, and the distant, muffled sounds of the city above. But then, just after 2 a.m., the elevator chimed. Now, that might not sound weird on its own, except no one ever uses the elevator this late. The main entrance to the garage is on the first level, and people usually take the stairs if they're in a hurry. The elevator is slow, old, and creaks the whole way down. I glanced at the monitor. The feed for the elevator was grainy, black and white, like something out of a bad horror movie. I expected to see someone inside, a hotel guest, a lost drunk, maybe even my manager checking in on me. But the elevator was empty. I frowned. Maybe it was just malfunctioning. That piece of shit was overdue for maintenance anyway. Then, the doors slid open. From my booth, I had a clear view of the elevator entrance on the first level. The light inside flickered weakly, casting a sickly yellow glow onto the concrete floor. But no one stepped out. I waited, watching. Listening. Nothing. After a few seconds, the doors slid shut again. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. I was about to go back to my coffee when I heard something that made my blood run cold. A single, echoing footstep. It came from inside the elevator. I looked at the monitor again, my pulse hammering in my ears. The elevator was still empty. Then, the camera feed glitched. Just a flicker, a moment of static, but in that split second, I saw something. A figure. Not a person. A shadow. It wasn't standing like a normal person would. It was hunched, like it had too many joints, its limbs slightly too long, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. And even though the camera was black and white, I swear to God, I felt it looking at me. Then, static. The feed snapped back, and the elevator was empty again. The doors slid open. Footsteps. Coming out. I turned my head so fast my neck cracked. The elevator was right there, maybe 20 feet from my booth. Nothing. But I knew something had stepped out. I felt it. The air was heavier now, charged like the moment before a lightning strike. My breath turned cold in my chest. Then, from somewhere on the first level, a soft scrape. Like the sound of a shoe dragging against concrete. I didn't move. I barely even breathed. I just sat there, gripping the edge of my desk, staring at the empty garage beyond the glass of my booth. I wanted to check the monitors, but I couldn't bring myself to look away. Another scrape. Closer. Then, nothing. Just silence. I stayed locked in place for what felt like an hour, my heartbeat thundering in my ears. Eventually, when nothing else happened, I forced myself to check the cameras. Still nothing. But I didn't leave the booth for the rest of the night. I didn't do my patrols. I didn't check the levels. I just sat there. Watching. Waiting. Because I knew it was still down there with me. And for the first time since I started this job, I didn't feel like I was alone anymore. That I didn't quit. I should have. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to walk out of that garage and never come back. But I told myself I was being paranoid. That I was exhausted. That maybe the grainy security feed had just glitched, and I'd imagined that hunched figure in the elevator. I lied to myself because the truth was worse. The silent car alarm. 2 nights later, just past 3 a.m., I was making my usual rounds. I hadn't heard the footsteps again, but the feeling hadn't left. That heavy, charged air. That presence just out of sight. I was walking past a row of parked cars on the second level when I noticed something weird. A car, a silver sedan, had its emergency lights flashing. No sound. No alarm blaring. Just the orange lights blinking in eerie, rhythmic silence. I stopped. The car wasn't on. The garage was dead quiet. But those hazard lights were flashing, the interior faintly illuminated with each pulse. My first thought was that maybe the owner had accidentally left them on. But something about it felt wrong. Like I wasn't supposed to be looking at it. Still, it was my job to check things out. I stepped closer, my boots echoing too loudly in the empty garage. With each step, my gut twisted harder, but I ignored it. I pulled out my flashlight and shined it into the car's driver's side window. The interior was empty. But something was off. I couldn't tell what at first, just a feeling. Then I realized. The inside of the windshield had smudges. Long, streaky marks, like someone had been dragging their fingers across the glass from the inside. My breath hitched. My flashlight trembled slightly in my grip. I leaned in just a little closer. And then, the smudges moved. I didn't see it happen. I just knew. The pattern on the glass wasn't the same as when I'd first looked. Like something had shifted while I was watching. I took a step back. My mouth had gone dry. Then, the light stopped flashing. Instant darkness. The entire garage felt wrong now. The air felt thicker, suffocating. The silence was too deep, like it was pressing against my eardrums. I backed away, turning toward the booth. I walked fast, my footsteps echoing. The booth was only a short distance away. If I could just get inside, lock the door. Then I heard it. Not footsteps. Breathing. Soft. Slow. Just behind me. I stopped walking. My muscles locked up. It was so close. Too close. Everything in me screamed not to turn around. Don't look. I forced myself to take a step forward. The breathing followed. Another step. Another breath. I couldn't do it anymore. My body moved before my brain could stop it. I turned around. There was nothing there. But the air, it was wrong. The space in front of me looked empty, but it felt occupied. Like something was standing right there, inches from my face. I felt it. Looking at me. And then. My radio crackled. The sudden noise nearly made me jump out of my skin. I fumbled with it, my hands shaking. The speaker let out a burst of static, then something else. A whisper. Not words. Just breath. Right in my ear. I ran. I bolted for the booth, slamming the door shut behind me, locking it. My chest was heaving, my hands still shaking as I grabbed the radio, my thumb hovering over the talk button. But I didn't press it. Because I knew. There was no one on the other end. No one had spoken. I wasn't alone. And whatever was down there with me. It wanted me to know. After that night, I stopped lying to myself. This wasn't just my imagination. It wasn't stress. It wasn't sleep deprivation. Something was in that garage with me. And it knew I was aware of it. The security footage. I told myself I wouldn't check the cameras. I really didn't want to. But sitting in that booth, with the dim glow of the monitors in front of me, my hand moved on its own. I clicked through the feeds, one by one, searching for something. Or maybe, deep down, hoping I wouldn't find anything at all. First level, empty. Second level, rows of cars, still and silent. Third level. I stopped breathing. Something moved. Not footsteps. No obvious shape. Just, something. A distortion, like heat rising off pavement. But this was a cold, dead concrete garage. There was no heat. I leaned in, staring hard at the grainy black and white footage. The distortion drifted, slow and unnatural, gliding between the parked cars. Then, for just a second, it turned toward the camera. And that's when I saw them. Eyes. 2 black pits where eyes should be. Deep, empty holes that weren't just dark, they were void. I shot back from the monitor so fast my chair nearly tipped over. My pulse thundered in my ears, and I tasted copper in my mouth. I squeezed my eyes shut. Counted to 10. When I opened them again, the thing was gone. The garage looked normal again. Just rows of empty cars and cold concrete. I tried to convince myself I'd imagined it. That maybe the camera had glitched. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something had just looked at me. Like it knew I was watching. And worse. Like it had been watching me first. The blind spot. I didn't leave the booth for the rest of the night. I kept my eyes on the monitors, my ears straining for any sound. I didn't even drink my coffee. I was too afraid that if I looked away, even for a second, something would move again. Then, around 3:30 a.m., I saw it. Not on the cameras. In the glass. The booth had a large window facing the first level of the garage. It reflected the monitors behind me, my own dimly lit figure, the desk. And something standing just behind me. I stopped breathing. I didn't move. I just stared at the reflection, my skin crawling with pure, animal terror. The shape was wrong. It was tall, too tall, its head nearly brushing the ceiling. Its arms hung too long at its sides, fingers twitching like they were reaching for something. For me. It didn't have a face. Just a smooth, empty stretch of skin where features should be. But somehow, I felt it looking at me. I didn't dare turn around. My hands clenched into fists on the desk. My heart pounded so loud I swore I could hear it echo in the booth. And then, the lights flickered. A blink. A fraction of a second. And when they came back on, the thing in the reflection was closer. Right. Behind. Me. I couldn't take it. I snapped my eyes shut, squeezing them so tight it hurt. My breath came in shallow gasps, my entire body locked up. I don't know how long I stayed like that. But when I finally opened my eyes, the reflection was normal. Just me. Just the booth. Nothing behind me. But I still didn't turn around. Because deep down, I knew. It was still there. After that night, something changed. It wasn't just about the footsteps anymore. It wasn't about the whispers, the flickering lights, or the thing in the glass. It was about me. It knew me now. It wasn't just lurking in the garage, it was fixated on me. And I had this sickening feeling in my gut that it wasn't just watching anymore. It was waiting. The emergency exit. I tried to push through my shift like normal. Act like nothing had happened. By 2 a.m., I couldn't sit in the booth anymore. Every time I looked at the monitors, I expected to see it again. That shifting distortion, those black eyes. So I forced myself to do a patrol. Just walk the levels. Keep moving. I took the stairs down to the lowest level. This part of the garage always felt wrong. The air was thicker, heavier, like stepping into a basement that had been locked up for years. As I walked between the parked cars, I kept my flashlight low, sweeping it along the concrete. My breathing was steady, my footsteps sharp in the silence. Then, a soft tap. Somewhere behind me. I stopped. The air around me went still. I turned slowly, shining my light between the rows of cars. Nothing moved. I swallowed hard and kept walking. My hand tightened around the flashlight. My heart was already racing, but I tried to push it down. Then, another tap. Closer. I spun around, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly across the garage. Nothing. But I knew better now. I knew it didn't need to be seen to be there. I needed to leave. I turned toward the emergency exit. It was a heavy steel door that led straight outside, no locks, no codes, just push the bar and you're out. I'd used it before on my brakes. I broke into a full sprint. My boots slammed against the concrete as I ran. My chest burned, my breath coming fast and ragged. I didn't care if I looked insane on the cameras, I just needed to get out. I reached the door, grabbed the handle, and shoved it open. It didn't budge. My stomach dropped. I shoved harder. Nothing. The door didn't even rattle, it was like it had been welded shut. I slammed my fist against the metal. Come on, come on. Then. The footsteps started running. Behind me. Fast. I turned just as the overhead lights flickered violently. The entire garage strobed between blinding white and suffocating darkness. And in those split-second flashes, it was coming. A shape. Wrong. Too fast. I couldn't see it clearly, just a twisted blur, limbs bending at angles that shouldn't be possible. Its head snapped toward me in jerky, unnatural movements. And it was closing the distance. I threw my entire weight against the door, my shoulder slamming into it. I didn't care if I broke something, I just needed it open. Bang. The lights cut out. Pitch black. Everything went silent. I didn't move. Didn't breathe. The only sound was my own heartbeat, hammering against my ribs. Then. A breath. Right next to my ear. Slow. Deliberate. Waiting. I squeezed my eyes shut. My body locked up in sheer, paralyzing terror. Then. The lights came back on. And I was alone. The door swung open behind me so easily I nearly fell backward. The cold night air hit my face, and I ran. I didn't stop. I sprinted out into the street, my breath ragged, my lungs on fire. I didn't care that I left my post. I didn't care if I got fired. Because I knew now. I wasn't supposed to leave. And whatever was in that garage. It almost had me that I didn't go back the next night. I didn't call in. I didn't answer my phone when my boss tried to reach me. I didn't care. Because I knew, if I stepped foot in that garage again, I wouldn't be walking back out. But even as I lay in my apartment, blinds shut tight, the glow of the streetlights casting eerie shadows on my walls, I couldn't shake the feeling that I hadn't really left. That whatever was down there, had followed me. The phone call. It was 3:12 a.m. when my phone rang. I jolted awake, heart hammering. My room was dark, except for the faint glow of my TV, still playing some late-night rerun. I reached for my phone with shaking hands. Unknown number. I shouldn't have answered. But I did. The line was dead silent. No breathing. No static. Just, nothing. Hello. My own voice sounded too small in the quiet. For a long moment, there was nothing. Then. Why did you leave? I nearly dropped the phone. The voice was wrong. Flat. Hollow. Like it was coming from the bottom of a deep, empty space. My breath caught in my throat. I tried to hang up, but my hand wouldn't move. Come back. The voice was closer. The hairs on my arms stood on end. My body felt ice cold, like all the warmth had been sucked from the room. Then. The TV flickered. For a split second, in the dark reflection of the screen, I saw it. Tall. Twisted. Watching me. And worst of all. It was smiling. A slow, impossible stretch of skin where a mouth shouldn't be. I dropped the phone. It clattered to the floor, the call still running. I backed up, pressing myself against the wall, my chest rising and falling in sharp, panicked breaths. Then, the TV shut off. Pitch black. And from the darkness, a whisper. Right in my ear. It said my name. The ending that isn't one. I don't remember what happened after that. I woke up the next morning on my couch, the phone screen cracked on the floor beside me. The call had ended. But I knew. This isn't over. I moved out of that apartment the next week. Left town completely. Got a new job, a new number, a new everything. For a while, things were quiet. But some nights, when I'm alone, when the house is too still, when the air feels just a little too heavy, I hear it. Footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Somewhere just beyond the edge of the light. And I know. It's still waiting for me to look. That's the end. Or maybe it isn't. I don't know. All I know is, if you ever find yourself alone in an underground parking garage, don't listen. Don't look. And whatever you do, never, ever run.